Hello, welcome everyone to the first talk of 2021 of the Alternate Shifting Communing series, a project presented and hosted by Call for Curators. I am Ilaria Conti, the curator of the series. And just to recap for those who might be joining today for the first time, this is a series that began almost 1 year ago at the beginning of the COVID-19 emergency. And the reason why we began this project in the first place was to carve out space and time to discuss curatorial practices that are rooted in ethical forms of relationality, that work on processes and long-term relationships, and not just on producing output, and also that proactively cultivate practices of solidarity, care, critical thinking, and that step away from hyper-institutionalized and normative understandings of what curating means. We started last year, as I said, but we see that it is still urgent and compelling to continue to discuss and think about these issues communally. So this series is also a way of addressing the responsibilities of curating and consider how we do things rather than just what we do. And so I always say that altering, shifting, communing is a statement of intent somewhat, rather than just a simple title, as it refers to the intentionality of this series, which is to alter the conversation, the terms of the conversation, shift ground, and commune with each other. So for this new season, let's call it that way, we will continue to gather on Tuesdays at 6:30 p.m. Berlin time. We will just be slowing down the pace of the conversations. We started every week, and then for a new season moved to every 2 weeks. Now, many of us have returned to more or less a regular work pace, I would say. And therefore, we also choose to not overload those who might be interested in tuning in. And that's why we will gather once a month for this season. So today I welcome Elena Sorokina and artist Alexandre Erre to discuss the initiative for practices and visions of radical care. So thank you to both for being here. As always, we will have a conversation for the next 40 minutes approximately. And in the meantime, I encourage those who are watching to ask questions through the comment section of Facebook and YouTube, or share thoughts via email at talks@callforcurators.com. Here it is. And so then after our conversation, we will spend the last 15 to 20 minutes asking questions to our guests. So Elena, Alexandre, thank you so very much again for being here. I would ask you to introduce yourself, your practice, just to get started. And I will also ask you directly the question that I pose to all guests of the series at the beginning of each conversation since we started, which I believe is still very, very important, and it's central to how we want to structure this series of talks, which is, where are you? But most importantly, how are you? And how have these past months been? So, Elena.
Ilaria, thanks a lot, because, this initiative has been like a really labor of love for two of us, Nataša, Petrešin-Bachelez, and myself. And we are always happy to talk about it. Because also, a lot of things happen. We keep creating new connections, asking new questions. So each possibility is a kind of like a great opportunity to connect, to discuss, also to open up. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. To introduce myself and to situate myself, I am curator. I was born and raised in Russia. Then I studied in Germany. I studied art history, so I'm art historian by education. And also during this time, my daughter was born, so I'm also a mother. And I started curating, actually, after my studies. I was more of an art writer, and I wrote for German newspapers and magazines. And I started curating in New York, where I actually completed the Whitney program. And this is something I would like to mention as part of my introduction, as our curatorial exhibition at the end of the Whitney program was entitled "At the Mercy of Others, the Politics of Care." And I'm very proud about it. It was 2004. And in last April 2020, I co-founded with Nataša Petrešin-Bachelez the initiative for practices and visions of radical care, which has been kind of developing since. And an important thing to mention is that we have been friends and colleagues for a long time, actually, with Nataša, for more than 10 years. So we co-curated projects together, we co-organized things together. We have been constantly in exchange, kind of professionally and personally. So this is something very important to mention because, you know, this kind of things, they can't pop out of nothing. And having a kind of a perfect understanding of the other is really crucial.
Thank you very much. And Alexandre, I ask you the same question, which is really, where are you, but also how are you, and how have these past months been?
I am with you from my apartment in Paris right now. And I think, all things considered, meaning from what I gather from friends, colleagues, and from the news, I think I've been doing rather good. We created a great collectivity and friendship with all the neighbors of my building, which, because we are around the same age, so making social interactions, laughs, and games were not a scarce commodity, but rather something plentiful. So I'm grateful for that. And also because my family lives in New Caledonia, Kanaki, I have the safety of mind. I don't know how to say that, but the peace, the tranquility to know that they don't risk catching COVID-19, because as of now there is not a case on the island. So that's also a source of relief. The only stress I can have as of now comes from the, I can say, difficulty to make some time for my artistic work and from my day job to find the energy, the strength in this, also this weather, this time of year, you know, less and less daylight and stuff. But other than that, I can't really complain. I'm in good health.
That is definitely the most important thing, and we have the chance to be talking about our work, and so that is a luxury for sure. So
I forgot something important
Go
to
ahead.
mention. Well, actually, I'm in Paris. It's quite cold because it's been snowing. It's been snowing just a little bit, but you know, as soon as it snows in Paris, it was a big deal. You know, people are making such a big deal out of it that it's kind of like, wow.
Yes.
So that's the situation. That's the current situation.
And we will talk a little bit more about Paris in a moment. So we're mixing up a little bit the usual format that we used to have. And so I will leave it to both of you, perhaps for a few minutes, just to talk about the initiative, Elena, in your case, and Alexandre, about your practice more broadly. And then we will sort of weave all these elements through a series of questions. So Elena, go ahead. I will leave it to you.
Yes. So in April 2020, we were both, Nataša and myself, we were both in France, and we were in a lockdown, in the first total lockdown in France, which started in March. And we, so the conditions were the following. All the public closed, only essential services were open, hospitals, food stores, and what was allowed actually on the walk, like you could have one walk per day, and just like walking outdoors, and you couldn't be further away than 1 kilometer from your home. I'm describing it because it is important for how we conceived actually our first project. So these were the conditions, and we were kind of discussing with each other, because we were lucky enough that we had projects. Nataša had the project, and not only human, not human at all, which continues. She continued to work on the project. And I had my exhibition at the Pera Museum, which was not cancelled. So we were quite active. And then we started to think about how can we be active in the situation? So how can we actually, as a matter of fact, well, exercise the profession and go back to the basics, meaning to the very definition of what curating means, etymologically. So it is care, and the world and the art world and the artists right now, they really seem in need of care. So that was our kind of initial, let's say, trigger. So, and then we had a couple of other triggers. Firstly, the lockdown, and secondly, what this lockdown made visible, what it kind of brought to this visibility. And of course, it was a caring labor. So caring labor and so-called essential workers, because they were the only ones who would take the metro or public transportation, go to work. And that was a kind of like one of those triggers, because usually, of course, these caring labor is invisibilized. So, and then suddenly there was this kind of like a moment of visibility. And then we thought also that this kind of like a language of crisis, which was framed as a sanitary crisis, was also quite particular. So, and we found, sort of, because we've been reading, of course, like everybody, it was an unprecedented situation. Now we're getting used to it, but it was back then very unprecedented. So we were reading and researching and like exchanging, and then we found this quote by Eliseo Macamo, who's a professor of sociology in Basel, and it is really, well, it articulated and triggered something in us. And I would like to read it. It's very short, but it's beautifully written. I don't want to rephrase it. So he writes that COVID-19 is a cruel reminder that the crisis is us. As we brace up to look the pandemic in the eye, we would be well advised not to forget what our normal is, namely crisis. History has taught us that you do not master crisis by setting the return to normality as your goal. You master a crisis by enabling yourself to act whatever the circumstances. So that was quite inspirational. And so we said, okay, we should act whatever the circumstances, and we should kind of invent ways to act. That's how it all started, and we decided like there are two kind of key words we started to work with and through and like around. The first is care, and the second is interdependency. And as I mentioned, actually, Lara, because we were in this exchange, we decided also not to theorize, but really to kind of focus on a practice, to invent acts, to look also for practices, rather than sort of like theorizing things or coming up with a new language, which might come as a next step, but it would be something different. So, and then the care. So the care came or was also partly inspired by Isabel Stengers, because Isabel Stengers, I mean, you're obvious, and I think people, especially our audiences, will know her work. So she writes a lot about this fast science versus slow science, and how simple facts as paying attention are considered as a kind of losing time, So, and of course, care is something which is a direct opposite to this idea of the fast science. So because care is slow, because it is all about repetition, it's about kind of continuation. So it is about attention. It is about a lot of attention, because you can't, accelerated care is a contradiction in terms. It doesn't exist. It's absurd. And interdependency was inspired by many things, because actually came out of Natasha's mouth in a conversation, in a Zoom conversation with curators, with colleagues of ours. And she said, I'm not an independent curator, I'm an interdependent curator. And indeed, it kind of like came out very naturally, but it's pinpointed to something, to this kind of like ideology of and image of independent kind of curatorial practice, which is a fiction, of course, and the situation kind of articulated it somehow, and also the way we see it, I would like to draw maybe a parallel. So it is a kind of thing which is brilliantly kind of described in Anna Tsing's book, you know, The Mushroom at the End of the World. So this really deep interconnections which are not visible, but which exists, but also on obvious connections and contacts between practitioners, between artists, curators, institutions, also between people who enable our work, who enable artists' work, who take care of production, but also maintenance, you know. So all these moments. And at the end of the day, so the initiative continues now, and it involves people. So we started to look for practices enacting care. So we're not, so practices who were looking towards the others rather than being like self-reflexive. So that was our first kind of point of departure. And then, so we started to research this type of projects, and then also to invite artists to kind of dialogue with us, to see what else we can do. And by now we have a group of practitioners who are artists, or maybe not necessarily artists, or it is not their self-understanding. So some practitioners that work like in a resolutely intersectional way. And they come from very different backgrounds, and they carry a lot of diasporic knowledges, actually. So they come from Brazil, from Sudan, from Afghanistan, from Italy, from France, obviously. And we decided that that was a perfect pool, and we decided that in this situation we should focus on Greater Paris. So we don't want to go elsewhere, and we would like to work in Paris, in the Greater Paris, meaning Paris, the center of the city, and the numerous suburbs, mainly disenfranchised and racialized. So this is our geography. Well, what else can I say? I think maybe it is enough for an introduction, and then we can go into questions.
Most definitely. Thanks, Elena. Yes, we can delve deeper into all of this. So then I will also leave it to Alexandre just to introduce us a little bit to the practice. And then, as I said before, we will sort of weave together the conversations that the two of you and with Nataša, to whom I just want to say hi, and we love her and appreciate her dearly.
Exactly.
We will talk a little bit about how you're weaving these networks of care and of relationship. But Alexandre, please go ahead.
Okay, so this is not how I've organized my my text. You've moved everything. So, going back from the beginning, but just my name is Alexandre Erre because it's from Sardinia, not R. I'm an artist from the Pacific island of Kanaki, New Caledonia, so using both words. To be brief, my work revolves around the things that are part of me, so naturally I'm kind of linked and attracted to this, being a queer person and defining myself as grey gendered. So that's one of the lenses through which I conceive my work. I spent my whole life in my country, so New Caledonia, until I moved to France for my high studies, meaning, so I went for the, how do you say in English, les beaux-arts.
Like,
so,
yes, fine arts school. Yes,
fine arts school. And because I try to, like you say, weave and knit everything to make some sort of sense for the later. But about my work, so there is this queer and gender studies that I always are a part of my reflection, and also the roots of my family in New Caledonia are tied to the country's past as a penal colony, because my ancestors, both French and Irish, came as convicts, and the other part ended up there because they were victims of blackbirding. So it's all very tied to the question of history, the roots, the transmission, and coloniality, which is also the focal point in my homeland to define our future as a nation right now and from the past like 50 years. So it's transitive state that I was born with and that defined me, and now the way I perceive things and how I go about my work. So this is one thing that I wanted to put as a foundation. And about the initiative, for me, because I think we all have different perspectives about the initiative, but for me the initiative is really just a band of cheerful chaps, I can say. Just like, it's not really about working, or we gather, we talk, we listen, we eat, we laugh. And for me, I think we're all different, but for me, it might be at some point maybe a bit more difficult to meet new people, or to create lasting relationships or lasting friendships at some point in your life. I'm early in my life, but the initiative helps me meet new people, exchange, talk, and share views, and just really about positivity, because we are always about walking, eating, and just sharing. So that's like a big part for me of the initiative, is being the fact that we don't like impose a goal to reach or standards or anything for me, for my bit, for my for my part. So, and that's for my practice, and how it weaves with the notion of care that we share with the initiative is and the shapes it takes, and the practice in general, is that it's very fluid. I'm not known for doing only silk screen printing, or only sculpture, or just being a video artist, or only painting. I think they are all means to an end, and they all just serve a purpose. So I take and explore each and every possibility, really. For example, I made an exhibition for the closing of my residency in Busan from February to early May 2020 at the Hongti Art Center. And it was designed to make the visitors, the viewers, feel like there were several artists in the exhibition. So I have a video. I don't know, Elia, if
Yes,
it's the right,
I will.
the proper time. Or
It's always the proper time. You
Always
set the proper time. So I'm gonna start. I'm gonna do a quick screen share, and then you, as we watch this, if you want, you can tell us a little bit what we're
it's just
looking
really
at.
to illustrate the idea of having several things for the exhibition, really.
Yes, definitely. Let me add it, and
Yes, I must thank the residency center for the tools they shared, the tools, the money they spent to produce these kinds of videos, to, how can I say, give some visibility to the work despite the pandemic, because I was in Busan, and so South Korea, right when the COVID-19 hit the country the hardest, and the earliest. It was just the beginning.
I'm gonna add a bit of volume.
Yeah, it's a little bit sketchy also. I mean, sketchy, shaky. It's a little bit frozen on my end. Will the link be shared on the chat section?
We will on the talk.
Yeah.
Which is this one. And we will have this link and everything else that we're going to show throughout. But I think this is a great opportunity also to see some of the easier work for those who might not have the chance to, that might be seeing it for the first time, and just to get a sense of how your work is configured somewhat.
Can I say something while
we're
waiting, Alexandre, unless you wanted to comment?
Go ahead, Elena.
Because it is a kind of important how we consider work precisely. So we try not to work. We really try not to work, and like we try to do everything that kind of like this building of relationships becomes the goal, the outcome, the kind of the focal point, and it's a kind of like it's integrated, like there's some atmosphere of empathy rather than kind of work or competition, and somehow it functions so far because so after the confinement, after the lockdown, what we started to do, we started to meet, but since it is not possible to meet indoors, so we started to do some kind of working picnics outdoors, and then we kind of identified a tree in one of the Parisian parks, so that became our office. And we would also, when we were invited to give talks online, so we'd say like, okay, so now we are in our office, and the office it's a beautiful tree, actually. It's quite an incredible tree. And then we had at some point a kind of like a exchange and discussion about this tree, because we invited Katitu Tayasu, who is a shaman and a healer and an artist and a researcher at the same time. So she has this absolutely wonderfully rich intersectional practice and identity. Yeah.
Thank you for this. So then, Elena, I wanted to ask you precisely about this. If you could talk to us a little bit more about the context in which the initiative was born. Some of those who might be watching this with us might not necessarily be familiar with the French context or the Parisian context in general. But I'm thinking also really about the socio-political and colonial context or colonial histories of Paris. But also this is something that we briefly discussed also while we were preparing for the talk, sort of the normativity of the urban space, its historically racialized structure, which is something you referred to briefly before. So somewhat, if you could just guide us through, again, further through some of these elements that are very present in the greater Paris region, as you were calling it before, but that, again, might not necessarily be evident for those who haven't lived in Paris, or that might have seen it only in passing somewhat.
All right. Paris is one of those European cities which consists of a center, kind of privileged and wealthy, and numerous suburbs which surround it, and these are rather racialized and disenfranchised, and this is where also this essential workers actually live. And we decided to reach, well, let's say to kind of like create to create a sort of geography which would deambulate and be kind of inclusive and be in constant exchange, because there are institutions, like small institutions who work in also in outside of Paris, in Parisian banlieue, so this is how you usually call them, and we also connect to them, but also the way we create, or we kind of constitute this kind of artistic and curatorial exchanges and all the practitioners, because what was important for us that, so we kind of exercise our job as curators, so we try to be there for the artists and to help as much as possible, but everybody needs a different type of help, but we also wanted the artists to be able to kind of exchange and support each other, because the initial idea was that we were looking for practices which would be the most vulnerable in the current situation, meaning that practices enacting care, so that practices which are not carried by the market, practices which can be well, can't sort of like be supported by institutions either, like it is not easy. So this kind of practices we felt would be the most affected and endangered in a way. So this is where we were looking for. And this is how sort of like this, we constituted somehow the group. For example, again, I mean, I would like rather to give you an example rather than sort of like elaborating on this kind of like a general structure. I'll give you two examples. One is the Katitu Tayasu, and the other one is Ismail Afghan. So Ismail comes, his current situation in France is asylum seeker, so he does not have a refugee status yet, and he had to escape Afghanistan because he was persecuted by the Taliban. When he arrived to France, he started to kind of try to connect. He has no formal art education, but he has a kind of a language connected to the tradition, to the ancestral tradition of the Afghan jewelry. So we started to work with him and to talk to him and to kind of like give him opportunities to exhibit, to talk to other artists, to sort of like show his work in spaces. And he started to develop, to kind of evolve and to a language on its own, combining, well, some sort of like surrealist kind of object plus this tradition of Afghan jewelry, plus a kind of cool design, like Occidental design. All that is kind of blended in his work. But of course, this type of work is in danger, because firstly, his status is very unstable. Secondly, the institution do not recognize it, and some do not want to recognize it as art because they think it's something else, and we are trying to to actually invent tools for him, because this is that's our job. That's why what where curating kind of comes in, so we have to reinvent many things for him, just like to be able to exist and to continue, and also to be supported and to be kind of like, well, educated, not in the sense of educated, but also be put in touch with artists. So this is one situation. And then I would like maybe to mention also Katitu Tayasu, who is a practicing shaman and healer with an academic background, because she came to France 20 years ago, and she wrote a thesis on ancestral knowledges and cosmologies, and then she started actually progressively developing her, I wouldn't even have a word for that. Well, her kind of way of being in the world rather than like a shaman. So she is a real practitioner. So she has her practice in a sense, but also she is a sound artist. She is a sound artist. She produces amazing sound work, and also she's an amazing writer. And that I discovered very recently, because again, so that was one of these situations that we understood that, you know, institutions, this is a place where traditional institutions and like classical art history doesn't go, because it's too much for them, because it's not, they can't like put it into a grid. It's difficult kind of to classify, to name, you know, to include and integrate still, you know, still today. And also her practice needs much more visibility, because she is invisible. I mean, her practice is invisible. So and we decided also to do something to help her. How can we help her? And so we also kind of decided, we decided to talk, to invite, to exchange. And I asked her to write a text for my exhibition at the Para Museum, which is running now, and which is entitled Crystal Clear, Travels in Sustainable Exhibition Making. I asked her to write a text, and she wrote an absolutely amazing text, which functioned at the same time as an invocation, actually, of the exhibition, because she delivered her own vision, animist vision of my show. And as a text where she explains her practice, where she speaks about animism, where she speaks about, and where she shows actually what it means, you know, what it means to look at artwork and an exhibition from an animist point of view.
Thank you.
I'll stop here, because I mean, I think I'm talking too much. I would like also to give Alexandre opportunity and chance to talk.
I'm just going to jump to another question to you, and then Alexandre, I would love to talk more about your practice and if you could show us more of your work. So we'll get to it in a moment. Yes. And but Elena, sorry, for those, you were talking a little bit about this sort of practical notion and the fact that it isn't just work in the traditional sense. So I wanted to ask you whether you could guide us through maybe through one project that the initiative has developed so far that you think exemplifies sort of these issues and methodologies that ground really the project at all.
Yeah, let's do that. We can speak about our first kind of foundational project, and then maybe Ilara, if you could show the images.
Yes.
We did two things in parallel. So and we were thinking about the initiative, the structure, and like the future of the initiative as like something kind of not an institution, because we're being very careful with the language. So it is some kind of something. Initiative is a nice word, because we agreed on this one, because it designs a kind of like an impetus, like an energy, you know, without sort of like, without an end. So initiative is not a structure, has no structure yet. And then at the same time, we organized a project entitled No Straight Line. And at that moment, we were in dialogue with the Berlin project Di Balcone. It has been quite visible, actually. It was also in the beginning of the confinement, but in Berlin. And it was curated by Joanna Barja and Ovul Dormusoglu. And we were in touch, and we also wanted to do something in the analog space, because another moment of kind of reflection was kind of considered, you know, like all this digital overload. So everybody experienced that. What is still possible to do in a public space? Is it still possible, or is it completely impossible? Taking into account that the confinement rules were very different in everywhere. So, and they were very different back then in France and in Germany. So in France, we were staying home. We had 1 kilometer kind of around the place we could sort of use as a workspace. And Berlin was using balconies, because they actually, as exhibition spaces, because they could go still from one place to the other and look at what was exhibited. So, but then there were also many other issues. Maybe we could put the images like on a slideshow, or
well, this is
just like you go through them. So the first images, like these are Parisian balconies. So I mean, we looked into, and that's coming back to your question, Ilaria. So Paris has a very different structure, very different notion of the balcony. So because the balconies are very much connected to this kind of like the buildings built by Osman in the 19th century. So there's a kind of like a very something related to the center of the city. So we decided to shift into an entirely different approach, and we decided to reinvent the line. This is what we decided to do. We decided to reinvent the line. Do we have more? Yeah, exactly. So this is a good one. This is École des Actes, and École des Actes is a small school located in the Parisian suburb of Aubervilliers, and it is a small school which teaches French to foreigners through art. And we decided to draw a line from the center of Paris, which is, so this is one segment of the line of the center of Paris, which is the Comédie Française. It is one of the main theaters, of course. It is a temple of the French language and French culture. So we decided to draw a line between this kind of central symbolic space and Aubervilliers, with this small, well, a kind of like art school for foreigners. And since we were in the confinement, we asked artists who, or non-artists, so it was more or less an open call, so who lives near the line and who can draw a segment of it, because people couldn't go very far. So because we just like traced the line, and then people started to fill in the line. So the line was infinite, or the line was a kind of like popping up, you know, segment by segment. And we had a lot of different proposals. So we had a line drawn in perfume. We had a line drawn in the color. She's an artist from Iran, and she's actually a refugee. She has a status of refugee in France. She's in Paris now with her family. So this is her kind of liquid line, so kind of based in her sculpture. Then we can go further with the images. Yes, then we collaborated with a group of women called Les Falonistas, so who connected between themselves, so who used all kinds of pigments, you know, natural pigments, and it was important not to well, of course, not to leave kind of like toxic traces. Street. So some lines were performative. Could we go further?
Yes, exactly. Tell me when to stop. I will continue to go.
Maybe we could accelerate a little bit.
Yes.
Right. So these are the segments. All these are the segments of the line. This is a version interpretation. So you see, everything was used, all kind of, yes. So, and this is Ismail Afkan, who I mentioned before. So, and he works with jewelry, and this is what he created. This is his interpretation of the line. So his take on the line was a kind of garland. And so he filled in this kind of like a segment of the line as a garland. We can go further. We can, yes. And so this is the, we can stop here. Yeah. So and this is what we actually, that was one of the projects for Ismail, because Ismail is in the middle, because we wanted to, and what you see actually is his work. So what people wear, you know, like the kind of like, we call it portable sculptures, or it can be called jewelry also. So we organized a kind of a photo shooting for him, so he has some kind of evidence, you know, that he is producing art and he's participating like in the art world.
Thank you.
Right, I think that's enough.
Okay, then I will stop. I will stop the screen share. Here we go. 1 second. And Alexandre, to sort of jump back to where we left before, you were talking to us about some of the key grounding histories and concerns and methodologies of your practice. And it would be great to sort of extend on that, also through this lens of care. And so I wanted to ask you, same as I did with Elena, whether also you could tell us more, but also if you want to show us some other work or some other elements that really embody this approach, that you feel properly embody this approach, for those who might not know your work at all. But we have the link to your website, so they will after this.
Yeah. I'm lost. I did not finish what I was saying earlier on the video.
Then let's take it right from there. No worries.
I wanted to say the care because I have something written to help me follow my train of thoughts. And the care in my practice comes also from the necessity to find the topic that I can address and how. And there is my voice coming back to me.
No worries.
And what can I say? Because to jump back, getting back in, but from the video excerpt that you were showing, that came as the closing of my 3-month residency in South Korea. But the care for me is also to know what I can address, where I can overstep, what can I. So when I went overseas and I went to a different country, what's the background work that you have to do to prepare, to read, to follow up about the culture, about the history, about, and in particular for South Korea, about its colonial roots tied to Japan. So for me, in a way, care was also, it's always that, but was also at this point about learning, gathering knowledge, giving time, giving my energy before moving, before the residency, in order to know what I can work on when I'm over there. So I gave myself some leeway because I wanted to learn as much as possible. Started to learn Hangul, the language of South Korea. And when you know, when you try to learn and educate yourself as much as you can do, you can find the spaces and caveats, I don't know, the little intersections where you can express yourself and also have a proper say, or like something we can share, with something we can have in common, and a common ground, yes, with the viewers. Because what I had in mind for this particular exhibition, it was to be able to communicate with the visitors, and at this point it wasn't going to be international audience. I knew it will be the people from living around the residency program. So I tried to have something very tied and very grounded, and the vernacularity of my work made wonders, I can say, because I really tried to second guess and assess and just persist into finding topics that could catch the interest of the visitors, of the Korean visitors. So I really had many how do you say, ecological issues, because there is like many things about it's like I think one of the first country about recycling, but also it's like many waste. People are throwing like a lot of stuff everywhere. So I work around this and about the ocean, because it was very interesting to me what was the relationship of the Korean and how it was like very hyperactive.
Yes.
Like OCD. It was very plenty of always boats, and because the ocean is very political for Koreans, because they share it with Japan and also China. And so they always have to reclaim the space, so they have to occupy it. So it's always very a constant war, not war, but like attrition game. I don't know. It's a very
tension.
Yeah, tension. So it was very interesting in that way. So my effort is always to understand and work with the flora that surrounds the spaces, the words, the concepts, the topics. So I feel like caring is about, for me, it's about wondering what's on the borders of something. What surrounds the work with is what care is with a capital C for me. Like, yeah, wondering about the limits. I don't know. This was part of the work, but this was just to close on the video that you showed earlier. What was the question already right now? Because I was still on the previous.
No, I think it is just one. It's part of one big question, which is really about sort of the practice and the grounding elements of your work. So now you were talking more about care. I also know that you wanted to show us a little clip from another work as well. If you want, we can show that,
Yes, because like I said, my train of thoughts can go each and everywhere. I don't know
in different ways.
Different ways, yeah.
But yes, I think it would be nice to show this briefly, and then I would like to ask sort of a closing question. In the meantime, Elena, they're asking us whether you could sort of spell out the name, and you can write it in the private chat if you want for me, of the shaman and the artist that you mentioned.
And Ismail, right.
Yes, so that I can share it also with those who are watching. So you have a private chat on the right, since a few people have been asking for that. So Alexandre, do you want me to show this brief video that we have prepared, and you can
I would like if I can introduce the video, but perfect. I don't know if we have enough time or anything, so...
We do. We have a few minutes, so go ahead.
Yeah, because just about just to come back on this topic about the care, and in a sense, right now we will show a video that in all of my works is also one of the things that embodies this approach. But so does many of my work. But I refer to what I've written down. But when you come from the south, when you come from a place that most people don't know about, like meaning New Caledonia, it's a French territory, and yes. French people from the mainland don't know about New Caledonia, so I can expect other people to know about it. Sometimes even Australians don't know about New Caledonia, so it's very particular. And when you're an LGBTQE+ person that questions your own gender, questions the social norms, and when you live in a country, for me now, so France, that was a major colonial empire, and that gives you always the imperative to integrate. That's the big word in France. You have to integrate to French society. So you have always this this pressure, this necessity. So I think when you gather all that, it's imperative to infuse care in your work and in your everyday life, because there is so much oppression. So care for me in my work and in this work that we will present, it's about giving myself tools to comprehend the oppression that I can live, and not to be just not to suffer from it. It's like to give me the tools to navigate the everyday life violence, the microaggression, like also a term that we use now, but how you can not be a stranger to the violence you live, but to have the tools to understand, to decipher, and therefore to be able to counterattack, or at least to know how to mend and to heal from this oppression. So my work is me trying to have a conversation with the viewer and share my perspective or tools, or just open a discussion, like Amandine Gay said for the title of a movie, to open the voice. So I think it's very important. And this work, The Discovery of the Unknown, like many of my work, always the title and a little bit cheesy, but I have many things happening in my mind. But the title, when I say The Discovery of the Unknown, is what discovery, what is the unknown, who is discovering what. So I'm already asking many questions from the get-go by the title. And it's addressing this kind of Western perception, Gauguin's-like vision of Tahiti or things like that. And for this work, I used two archives video. The narrator, the video from the voiceover, comes from an advertisement that we used to promote tourism in Tahiti. And the video was an advertisement meant for the American public to promote nudist camps. So the idea, by doing a very small move, a small gesture, was to create friction, because the idea was to inverse the condescendence
or being patronizing. Yes.
Yeah, the patronization of the Western viewer, because they are talking in a fashion, in a way, like they were talking of native people, but so with a Western view and patronizing. But right now they are talking about the American people. So it was like trying to invert the poles, invert the gravity, and just using small tools, turn the gaze back to the viewer and to the violence. It's always what I try to do in my work. It's also about care and ethic, is not to use the images of people of color or people already suffering from oppression, not to use their images to further my artistic agenda, and rather turn, like I said, the gaze of oppression back on the oppressor. So that was kind of the idea.
Wonderful. Perfect. I will share it now. So it's a longer, just for those who might be watching this or have tuned now, we're just going to share a little clip of a longer work. Let me just prepare it for a moment. Here we go. Let me see if you...
A great great French navigator Bougainville described it. He wrote, "Nature placed it in the climate universe, embellished it smilingly, enriched it with all its gifts, with hand inhabitants, tall and strong. She herself dictated them. We follow them peacefully and form perhaps the happier society. Legislators and philosophers come here to see established, have not dreamed of. The land he was Vast paradise hasn't always been easy. It's far removed, and Tahiti might still be out of our reach. Without the efforts of daring
Pioneer travel agents.
you'll like the Tahitians. You've got to admire a people who not avoid traffic meters and one, but also a better use for the coconuts. This is our of the holiday inn in Papaete.
Yeah, definitely. But like I said, like about the Western gaze, because there is also the whole sociological aspects. Because when I was making the work and analyzing the work, I also thought about the need from the settlers to cover the natives' body, converts them to a new religion, and shame about the body, and say that some ways were savage ways. But at the same time, we had the American nudist camps that were being promoted, as were the Nazis' promotion of the Aryan body. So there is always this two-way street where you need to further your own views and at the same time coexist. People being naked and it's shameful, and so at the same time promoting the beauty of the white body. So that was about putting this, amplifying this view, doing this work.
Thanks, Alexandre. So we're about to run out of time, but I'm glad that we had the chance to see at least two projects. I will just jump to, well, first I encourage those who are watching to type their questions if they have any. And I will ask one last question that relates to the initiative. And I guess, Alexandre, please feel free also to jump in this broader question. Elena, at the beginning, someone was asking us what other projects you are planning to do in Paris and its suburbs. And I guess I will just take that question and merge it with mine, which is really about next steps or moving. I don't want to use the word forward because I'm not a believer necessarily of this notion of forward, but sort of now that you are building this network of care, of relationships, of projects, and Alexandre, also for you, as you were saying before, it's also a personal element, that enriches the ability to have conversations, to enter in different forms of relations that might not necessarily give themselves naturally otherwise for a variety of reasons. Then I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts in thinking about other steps, additional steps, lateral steps, or what might be for the initiative, and Alexandre, for your practice, given also that we are not out of the historical circumstance and social circumstance that first generated these type of relationships and practices, and also that still the urgency also remains in terms of the sort of, to say, professional art world, sort of curatorial practice, artistic practice, how these relate to one another. What are, again, the ethical forms of relationality that we establish across all these practices? So
I'm lost.
No worries. I just we'll start by asking Elena sort of this question for the initiative, and Alexandre, you can tell us also what you're working on and what you're planning then on doing as we're moving past this time. Elena, go ahead.
Well, we actually continue. We work on we are like the last time we sat down with Nataša in the beginning of the year, and sort of like wrote down what we would like to do with the initiative. And there are so many projects that I think that we'll never manage to do it all. Because also we're looking for support, because we would like to support also financially artistic practices. So we're applying to foundations and like government, the all type of associations, and as you probably know, that Nataša, she started to work at the Cité des Arts as a director, or curator for public programs. So we consider if there kind of might be some links between what the initiative does and what the Cité des Arts is interested in. Then we are also working on a language, because we decided from the very beginning to focus on the practice and not worry so much about, let's say, structure, or about the language, or about the frame, or about like theorization of these practices. But it is very interesting, because when we are asked, is it a network? So what you are doing, we hesitate to confirm. So because network has so many different connotations, so many negative connotations related, like connected to this, what we call today extractive digital extraction. So no, we're not network. Is it an institution? So not. It is not an institution. We don't want to institutionalize. Then what do we want? So is it about use value? Because at some point I was interested in Tanya Bruguera's notion of use value. Right. So, but how to kind of introduce it, how to articulate it maybe in a different way. And this question of language becomes kind of like important, because we invite people to think about it with us. And for example, to go back to Katitu's practice, to Katitu Tagasu practice. So she has an amazing language, because I mean, I could have given more examples, but it would be unfair, because you can just like drop in a name without actually presenting the practice, because then it is not really kind of understood and mediated in the right way. But what I wanted to tell you, if you don't mind, so this is the catalog, right? So, and this is what she wrote in her text, which is very long, but it is a very, very short paragraph, just like to give you a glimpse of the way she thinks and she feels, because for her, this kind of a transmission of this complexity of her senses, which she also kind of defines as extrasensorial capacities. It is very important. So just to remind you, she writes about my exhibition, and I invited her to, like, I gave her carte blanche, basically. So she says, as an outsider, I have thought of my soul as an extensive net. My soul became home to this unity as woman, man, crystal water, bird, animal, plant, flower, and forest, trees. Since my exile, the soul is the only soil and country of attachment for me. For a long time now, my religion is a modest art, and its work is sensitive to life. My I has become a we, and this consciousness helps me overcome the illusion of solitude and the dark shadow of egocentric and egoistic societies. End of quote. I think I will stop here, unless there are other questions.
Thank you, Elena. Well, I want to give Alexandre also the chance to sort of tell us, again, we shouldn't say forward, but somewhat also what are you perhaps working on now or thinking about these days and through this time, and
Yeah,
sort of.
I'll make it short, I swear.
Go ahead, no worries.
But yeah, as of now, we are all still in the pandemic. So as much as I would like to, I was very much looking forward to a new artistic residency. So I had many files and fear and goals to reach and objectives, but as of now, I'm finding pleasure in settling down, having some reflection on my work, on cherishing my relationships and the connections to the people I have here in Paris. So that's a thing. I've been working now in a residency on the French suburbs, like it's called Push Residency by Manifesto. So now I have a space to work, to produce new work. So it's great. And I've been working since my country politically is still in the trying to be independent from France. So that's the process we are going through right now. And I am very involved in that. And as much as I can, I want to go back and be able to cast my vote myself. But the urgency now and the plan is to define what is our society, what are our plans for the future. And my work right now is looking for what are the small things that despite the origins and the culture and what we all share in common in New Caledonia. So that's my work as of now. It's producing small items that we share and that puts a smile on our faces. That's how I care right now.
Thank you.
I find great solace in that, great pleasure.
It is wonderful, and thank you for sharing this project also with us. Well, our time is up. I just want to thank you, both of you, so very much for your generosity, for your time, for your knowledge. I also want to thank you, those who have been with us throughout this conversation and that have been tuning in and asking questions and commenting. So thank you, Elena. Thank you, Alexandre. And I just want to remind everyone that we have, of course, for each talk, some resources and links. And so, this is a page. It's the page of the talk, is the link that Call for Curator always shares. And there we will gather all these elements for those who might be interested in reading more or watching other interviews or learn more about Alexandre's work. I also want to remind that we have an email address, which is what I showed before. In case there are questions or follow-up, we are happy also, I'm very happy all the time to act as a bridge if needed, to pass on questions to our guest or commentary, or even for us for feedback on the talks and so on and so forth. So I encourage everyone to really use this email address. And I also want to remind everyone that we will be back in March with a new conversation of the Alt-Shift-COMM conversation series. Thank you again. Be safe.
Thank you.
And until soon.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.